But anyway, there's some relation. So my name's Eric Deandrea. I'm a Java champion. I work for Red Hat. Currently, I'm moving to IBM in July. I'm a Java champion. I talk a lot at a lot of different places, but you see me here pretty much every meeting. I'm on the board here. So I want to talk a little bit about a real world use case of Java and AI, because everybody's seen the chatbots and everybody sees, these where you're talking to things. But I tend to think that there's two kinds of AI out there. There's the AI that's trying to replace or replicate or pretend that it's a human. And then there's AI that's trying to replace or replicate part of a workflow or other software that you're trying to build where there's not really a person or a human. And so this use case came up to me. I'm always like developers, we're terrible at naming things, but we're also very terrible at coming up with ideas to prove concepts. So I've been looking for a long time to prove out, and I think what's really missing in the industry is who's doing stuff with AI today? Anybody have AI stuff running in production? Or I guess not, it doesn't have to be in production, but you've been doing it for a little while. If you were to make a change to your prompt or change to your model, do you know if you got better or worse? No, nobody can answer that quite yet. Yes, it gets worse. Yeah. So we can just assume it gets worse. So I've been chasing this question for a while, and I think it has a lot of things that are involved with it. Because in order to know whether you got better or worse, you have to know how have you been doing historically, so you have something to compare to. Kind of like performance testing, right? Except with performance testing, you have an idea of what good looks like. In this case with AI, you don't really know necessarily what good looks like, and unless you're evaluating yourself as you go along, you don't know whether you got better or worse. So that's kind of where this whole thing started from, was how do you get better or worse? And so trying to figure out a use case, we were sitting around at Easter talking about use cases. And so we came up with this problem. And so I live in Salem, New Hampshire. One of my family members volunteers in their local historical society. And so they have this building, which they've just renovated, and they do tours through the building, and they have local historians, and they've got probably hundreds of artifacts in cases upstairs. They've got all kinds of stuff in these cases, stacked everywhere. They've got signs, they've got clothing. This is just an example of some stuff that's on the wall, and they have absolutely no idea what any of this stuff, or most of the stuff. Some of the stuff is like a pair of ice skates. They can figure out what the ice skates are, but there's a lot of stuff in here that they have no idea what they are. So when people come in and tour, they don't really have a whole lot to tell them because they don't know what it is. So I kind of thought about, well, wouldn't it be cool if, when you came in here, you could take a picture of the thing, and it had some description of what the thing was with a QR code that then you could put next to the thing. And so someone could come in and just scan the QR code, and then they can know what the thing is, right? That kind of seems like a pretty easy solution. And so this is kind of when I threw an MVP together, this is kind of what it came out with. I wanted, from consistency perspective, I wanted whatever the picture was there. I wanted like 3 or 4 lines, something that like a 6th grader could understand, like nothing technical. A category, they could categorize these things. So like if they knew it was some kind of a tool or a clothing item or a weapon or whatever it was, they could feed that in and then find some kind of reference to it out on the web, like Wikipedia or something. Right. And then because they've got hundreds of them, they want to manifest. So as they're cataloging these things, they want to have a manifest of what all these things are, where the QR codes are, where the documents are, and so on. And you can start to see I've got like Google Docs and Excel, and you might think, well, why not just a database? And so that's where the non-functional requirements and constraints come in. So I didn't want to put all old people because I don't want to assume that old people are not tech savvy, but there's a lot of not tech savvy people that are part of this board, that run this organization. And there's also no money. So can't have infrastructure that you pay for, can't have anything that costs a lot of money, and it has to be stupid simple that anybody can use who's not tech savvy. So those are kind of like, everything has to be built around that because those are the most important requirements. So the initial thing when she came to, when we started talking about it, the Boy Scouts, right? And Boy Scouts, we have lots of Eagle Scouts, and Eagle Scouts have to do these year-long projects. So like, oh, we'll get a couple of Eagle Scouts to do this project. They'll go through, they'll catalog. I'm like, do you know how many man hours are involved in this thing? Trying to like, okay, I have this thing, go do research. What is it? write out this thing, find it on Wikipedia, create a QR code, store that. Like that's a lot of work. Like this is where like kind of the engineer in me said, hi, I know how to make this problem a little bit easier to solve. Sure, maybe you still need the Eagle Scout to print the QR codes and stick them up somewhere, but this is definitely something we should be able to automate. And so what I'm going to say now is everything I'm about to say from here on out is still under construction, because I haven't finished building this yet. So I've kind of started with this grand scheme of how I want to build this. And part of it is because I want to learn about stuff too. So of course I can completely over-engineer it. And then once I start playing, I can narrow it back into reality, right? So of course, I'm going to start with Quarkus because that's my bread and butter. And I know I'm going to need LangChain4j because there's some AI in there. And so my thought process was, what if we take all these pictures, and they lay them out in a file system, and they can categorize them with folders. So if they know if there's a bunch of tools, they can create a folder for tools. They can create the folders however they want. And then they can put like a description file in there if they want to elaborate on whatever that category is, like provide some additional information about the category, they can do that. And then we'll run through that. We'll do it in like a batch. This isn't like a one-off thing. We're going to do it like all at once. So that's kind of one of the original goals. Maybe in the future, if they get a new one, we can add something that you can do a one-off. But for now, it's going to be take all the pictures and we're going to do this whole thing in one shot. So we're going to send it off to the AI to do the description. We're going to create a Word document, and Word document specifically because the people have Word and Excel on their files on their computers, and that's what they're familiar with. Yep, we don't want to teach them something new. So they've got Word, and then we're going to store the Word doc in a Google Drive because they do have an email account, and it happens to be Google, and Google Drive is free, right? And they know how to use it, and they know how to pull documents down, and they know how to edit documents. And then once it's created and we store it, we'll create a global sharing permission for it. So anybody who has the link can view it, right? So if you were to click the link and have the link, you can go view this document, but you can't edit it because Google Docs knows how to render Word. And then you can generate a QR code based on that URL, which gives you the code. And then I'm going to add it to my manifest. And I chose to, as I'm doing this, to keep like a little local running database as I'm doing this so that I can just kind of spit out a manifest at the end. So then store the manifest as a spreadsheet and then store that and then hand out all the QR codes for them to go print and stick up and whatnot. Right. So like I said, I want to learn. There's stuff I want to learn. I can completely over-engineer this thing. So who's heard of Model Context Protocol? A couple of hands. So Model Context Protocol is kind of like the new thing when you hear agentic AI. It's essentially like, I don't know how to do this, but I can ask an AI to do something for me. And I have no idea who owns that AI, what Trojan horses are baked into that AI, what kind of security constraints are in that AI. There's a lot going on. And this changes so fast. Like if you were to go back 2 months ago and look at what's out there in MCP and what's out there now, it's like night and day. Like this, like it changes so fast. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to learn how to create Google Docs in Java. I don't want to have to learn how to create QR codes. I don't want to have to write all that code. I want to write as little amount of code as possible and have the AI do everything for me. So that's my grand vision. I'll talk about what actually is happening in reality in a second. So if we come back to this architecture, so I'm going to use MCP with LangChain4j to read the initial file system. So I'm not going to write that code. I'm just going to write the kind of the integration with LangChain4j to tell the AI to do that. I'm going to use the AI to do the image description, and that's going to be my own code. I'm going to use MCP to create the documents. I'm going to use MCP. You can see where this is going. I'm going to use MCP for that. I'm going to use MCP for creating the sharing permission. ChatGPT is actually pretty good at generating QR codes. You might argue, well, there are Java libraries that are pretty simple that you could probably do in the same amount of lines of code and it wouldn't cost you any money. I'll nod my head and say, yeah, that's a true statement. But again, I'm over-engineering because I want to experiment and play. Adding to the manifest, you could write your own Java code that's exposed as a tool to the AI that it can invoke to store it into a database. And then I'm going to use MCP, right? So lots of MCP in there. I don't want to have to parse file systems. I don't want to have to know how to interact with Google Drive. I don't want to have to know how to create Word documents, spreadsheets, any of that stuff. I want the AI just to do it for me. That's right. So what could possibly go wrong, right? So we kind of backtrack a little bit. So now we get into reality. So I've been working on this for about 6 weeks now, off and on, when I get some spare time. So what have I learned so far? And I've got some tips and best practices and lessons learned. So the file system MCP thing didn't really work that well. Well, it kind of worked sometimes, but not all the time. And I figured this is like the most important part. Like if I don't get this right all the time, then the rest of this flow is just meaningless, kind of garbage in, garbage out. So I decided to write my own code for that. So I did that. The AI for describing the image is very good. That works really well. The writing out to the Word and creating Word documents, again, it kind of worked, it kind of different. The problem I was having is if I'm doing 600 of these, every document had a slightly different format, and I want them all to be consistent, right? So maybe I could play with the prompt and get it to do it, but after like 3 or 4 days, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go to the AI in my IDE and say, hey, can you write me code that does that? And in half an hour of making it look pretty, now I have the code using Apache PLI, which if you're not familiar with that, it's a open source library for creating and working with Office documents. So now I have a class that I can fully test, and it's deterministic, and I didn't write it either. So, the AI I still use AI. I just use the AI that's in my IDE to do it for me. The putting stuff out to Google Drive, storing it, and the sharing permissions, that's kind of where I am now. I'm about ready to start looking up how do I use the Google Drive SDK, and so I'm almost to that point. The generating the QR code, that works pretty good. ChatGPT is pretty good at that. If I want to swap it for like the Zing library or something, that would be pretty easy. The tool interaction to store it in the database, that works pretty well. It's pretty easy. I haven't gotten to the manifest yet, so I haven't gotten to that part yet. So yeah.
Just before you go on, what are you putting in the QR code?
It's the URL to the document. So when they scan it, it opens a browser, and now they see what the thing is.
It's not some other data. It's just the URL. It's just an URL.
It's just a URL. Just a URL. Yep. So what have I learned, or am I still learning? Because again, this is an ongoing process here. The most important one is the model matters. Which model you use really matters. Of course, I wanted to start with something like Ollama, where it doesn't cost me any money to play around. Anything that you can run on your laptop is terrible and does not work most of the time. So the ones that you pay for are the good ones. I found GPT-4.1 has been the best so far and the most consistent. I've tried it with a couple of Gemini models and a couple of Mistral models, but I found GPT-4.1 for what I'm doing has been the best. It's not perfect, but it's been the best. Being explicit has also helped. So when you're writing codes, I don't have time to get fully into the underpinnings and workings, but when you send a request over and you're exposing tools or functions that the AI can invoke, you're sending descriptions of what the tools can do and like what the arguments are and what the types of the parameters are. But you can also add other annotations that in human readable text describe what it does rather than just a variable named X. Don't do that. That's not very good. So yeah.
Wouldn't it be faster to just hand the code that you found and have it, formatted into your structure, because it takes a very long time to write verbally everything, even small programming.
I'll get there. Yeah, that's part of the joke that's coming. Yeah,
right. We'll laugh.
Yeah, we'll laugh anyway. Yes. Yeah, so if you didn't hear it, she's like, "Well, why couldn't you just do it faster?" Basically.
Oh, well, no. I mean, sometimes you do actually want the AI to produce it, but it takes forever to write it in English. In code, we're all programmers, and it's actually much faster to write the code and say, okay, do this, but have the input be like this or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So there's a joke coming about that. So tell the model what's going on. Be explicit. Be verbose, because models like verbosity, and the more verbose you are, the better it's going to behave. Because it's kind of like a teenager, right? If anybody have teenagers or have had teenagers, try to get a teenager, a 12, 13, 14-year-old to do exactly what you want them to do. Not anything else, but just exactly what you want to do. You kind of have to talk to them like that. Keep your arguments concise. So encapsulation, single responsibility. So if you're sending data to the LLM, keep it categorized and structured in a way that makes sense, so the LLM doesn't like reinterpret things and go off in different areas. Something I learned as when you're doing tool arguments, everybody's familiar with JPA and the persistence API. You can write your Java code and you can pass objects around in your Java code. But when you have a method that you're exposing as a tool to an LLM, usually those JPA entities have a lot more stuff, like an ID, especially if you're creating something new and you have an ID field, the LLM says, oh, I have an ID field I have to create. Well, no, the LLM should not be creating your IDs for you. So don't use the JPA entities, because as I started to do 400 of these things, it was just making up random IDs all of the time. And sometimes it was stomping over all the ones I already had. So the thing here is I find that in my code, I have a lot more Java records that somewhat mirror my entities, but have less stuff. So keeping this kind of goes to the concise, keep your arguments focused to just the data that you want the LLM to focus on. So now I'm starting to have like record sprawl, or I've got more things in my code than I would normally have if I wasn't using AI. Again, be overly descriptive more so. MCP is like the Wild West. So if you're not familiar with MCP, there's plenty. You can just start Googling, give me a Google Drive MCP server. It'll fire it up in your laptop. Do you have any idea who wrote it? If it has a Trojan horse, if it's sending your RSA keys somewhere? No. So like, there's no security has been involved here. So it's still like, it's a crapshoot as to whether something actually works and what you can trust, what you can't trust, which just, it's not there yet. Testing is really hard. Like, I have a whole nother talk that focuses on testing non-deterministic things I could spend 2 hours talking about, but especially for something like this where everything is non-deterministic, testing is very hard. And kind of the end joke, would I have been able to do this faster if I didn't involve the AI? Probably at this point. Probably. You know, I probably could have written all the code and had this whole thing working. And so, but part of it is I wanted to experiment. Part of it is I wanted to come up with like this list here of things that are changing rapidly. But I wanted to play around with technology, but they're also waiting for me to finish this because they have 600 artifacts that they want to categorize. So at some point I'm getting close to, okay, I just have to write it myself and then I can come back and play later. But I'm not getting paid for it, so they can wait. Right? Yeah, so that's it. If the code, so I have the code, there's a QR code there, there's a repository that's got all the stuff. The slides are there. Let's record. Oh, so this talk, I did a full hour recording where I deep dove into the code as I was talking. I tried to take an hour talk and shrink it into 15 minutes for this. So if you want to see the full version of it, there's a recording on YouTube that I did this week on a podcast. So that's all. Yeah. Question.